Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Today part 1 of my Melodic Techno Ableton template explanation. Basically this template I've been creating live during my live stream session. You can go on my channel on the live tab and you can see there I created this track from scratch. So if you want really a bit more in-depth creation, you can go check it there. Today I'm gonna go over each track individually and explain you the sound design, the MIDI pattern and so on. And next week it will be part 2 where we talk a bit more about the arrangement, automation, variation, mixing and mastering. Alright, let's have a listen how it sounds.
We are taking the control. Your existence is over. We are the future. You cannot stop us.
Alright, so that gives you an idea of the track. I'm not gonna play the whole track, but you can check the link in the description to go to check the template and you will have the sound clouding with the full track. And yeah, let's get started with the first track, which is the kick drum. By default, so kind of a 808 but a bit more bonded and punchy. With a bit of click. Here I use my King Punch rack. I will put it in the description if you want to grab it for free. It's basically a rack where you have a dry signal and a wet signal where I process with some distortion and reverb. The idea is to just add a little bit of reverb on top of your kick, just to make it breathe a little bit, to make it help cut through the mix. So you can hear in the context of a track. And then we have utility just to make sure everything under 130 Hz is in mono. And now let's move on into the hats. So we have here the what I call open hat, but it's basically you have a one closed hat and two open hat. So you have the classic closed hat, which is like kind of a 16 closed hat. I think I use the groove pool, yeah, the swing MPC, just you can see it make you pattern a little bit, shift a little bit, the velocity stay the same, but I do not shift a little bit, so instead of having something like this, something like this. Here not much to say about, I just high pass filter. Then we're gonna have an open hat of beats, so it sounds like this. Nothing crazy to be honest for the hats for this track. And then I will add another open hats later just to making it a little bit richer. And you can see at the end of 4 bar you kind of double the hat. Pretty simple, straightforward. They are all kind of EQ in the way to fit the track, but I will come back to this next week about the mixing. And then I've done the combo that I like to do, so I use the same reverb for all of them. And here what I've done, you have kind of a classic reverb, which GK is quite long for some hats and drums. But here what I'm doing is I'm using drum bass. I like to use drum bass. You're gonna see I use it a lot on this track, almost on every single track of the song. I like to use drum bass because it kind of does a lot of things very well. First, you can just click on one button and it's gonna compress everything, and you can adjust the trim, which is the input level, to kind of adjust that. And then usually I will add some crunch, we'll add some extra harmonics in the mid-high, which is perfect to make things a little bit brighter and louder. And then here, what I usually do is I use transient negatively. So when you use it positively, it's gonna add a bit of transient, like make it you sound a bit more percussive and a bit longer as well sometimes. And when you play negatively, just after a reverb, like in that case, it kind of acts as a gate. So it's gonna kind of make you sound shorter, and therefore here it's gonna kind of tame the reverb of the tail, acting like a gate reverb a little bit. So compressor, and you can see how it shut down the tail of the reverb. The other reason I like to use drum bass is kind of make your hats a little bit more sharp and somehow modern. So then you have a snare, which is just basically 2 snare layer. Actually one is a clap, one is kind of a snare. This is always tricky to find a good snare or like a good thing. It's always you need to listen with your kick. And then erosion is gonna add a bit of noise. and then you have a bit of reverb, which is more like a room reverb, this one, with pretty short GK and not too much dry wide amount. And then again, same idea with the drum bass, compressor, adjust the trim input, and reduce it. And just finally, just a bit of EQ to boost here. Then we have a snare roll. So for this one, I use a different snare because it's different purpose. I wanted the snare a bit more noisier and a bit more percussive. You see, you need that kind of big noisy snare. And then it's just a 16 close hi-hat pattern, and you can see according to the length I need, I will do like crescendo velocity. So if you want to do that, you need to press B and you have the draw mode there, and then you just hold Control and you can draw the waveform you want. So that's pretty handy. Then the processing is very similar to the other one. You can see just EQ to cut the bit low, but then it's erosion for noise, reverb, and drum bass. I'm not gonna go over because it's exactly the same process. Now let's talk about the bass. You have two bass for this track. One which sound like this. Let's see the pattern. You can see it's kind of a classic rolling bass line, which is going up and down with the velocity. This note basically is like offbeat. You have your kick here and here, creating this nerve groovy and percussion. Keep in mind you have some sidechain as well going on. Yeah, let's remove the effect. So this is a pretty basic patch. Usually for this type of bass line, I will use a sawtooth and I will apply a low pass filter. So here I use the 24 dB Prodigy style low pass filter. I bring down the filter, and then I use an envelope to modulate this filter, and a pretty sharp envelope. So it's gonna open the filter very fast just to catch the harmonics, but keep making the sound very bassy and percussive, and just that top harmonics to add a nice color and tone to your bass line. So if I remove the envelope, you can see it's a pretty nothing happening. But because I have this envelope here, which is pretty sharp, you see, if I longer the GK, it's getting longer and not nice. And yes, always a bit of drive to add a bit of loudness and crunchiness. Here, you see I use the mini wave, which is kind of gonna be kind of a sawtooth this. You can hear it, and then a bit of FM. And then you have the sub as well, which gonna give a nice bottom to your bass line. And that's pretty much it. This patch are always very simple. Usually the hard things to do here is to find a kind of a sound or wavetable that is gonna fit with your kick. This is often the harder. And then after I would always process it, a bit of reverb. So it might sound weird reverb on bass, but it just works. It's same that with for the kick. I found it sound very dry and too much in the back and not like part of the mix if I don't put a bit of reverb. We can see for example with the kick. Like you can clearly hear without the reverb that the bassline doesn't fit the mix at all. Drum bass, same as usual. Here I use the hard mode because it's gonna add some extra harmonics in the low end, so you can hear. And then again, compressor, a bit of crunch for mid-high harmonics, and trying them negatively to tame a little bit this reverb tail. Then I have this sidechain here. So this sidechain, it's a rack I took from another YouTube channel I put in the description, which is called On and On. It's basically a shaper with a utility, and what it does, it kind of imitates a sidechain effect, so it brings down the gain at every beat. So every time your kick is playing, basically it's gonna bring down the volume, and you can control the amount of sidechain here. So that's pretty nice. One of the inconvenience of this is you can hear it introduce a click, but most of the time I will have an EQ after that to kind of tame this very high frequency to make it a bit more subby, bassy. So it's not a problem. And then I just remove everything under such ears that I don't need. Here I reduce it because when I was listening on the speaker, I found this frequency a bit too dominant, so I just tame it a little bit. Especially after when there is a kick, obviously. And then make sure everything under 200 Hz is mono. Alright, then we have our second bass, which is kind of a stab plucky bass. You can see the pattern here. This is something I record with the push 2. I like to do that to put in repeat mode 116, and then I would just like play, try something. And you can see here, that's what I've done. You can see the velocity is a little bit all over the place as well. You have some notes shorter than other. I like to do that, and I will usually use the capture button to then pick up the parts I like. And then in terms of sound design, you have the first oscillator. It's kind of a square waveform. A bit of noise that I use a wavetable to create noise because there is no noise generator in our Ableton wavetable. So I always use a noise wavetable, and I apply some FM amount. So like this, I don't have the send part. I almost have just noise, and then some sub here. Okay. And that was actually our square waveform. Sorry, I was on the lookout part. And then again, low pass filter, 24 dB, Prodigy, bring down the filter, modulate with an envelope, pretty sharp envelope. You can see 80%. And the amplitude is pretty similar as well, pretty sharp snap amplitude. Here I have a bit of LFO on the pitch. It's mainly to add this kind of vibrato effect, but it's pretty subtle. Usually when you slightly modulate the pitch, is always adding a bit of excitement. So it doesn't always work, but in that case it was working, so I left it. And then finally I put it in mono, and I have the unison mode, which gonna add some stereo and a bit of detune. You can see I didn't even use the amount, it's just in voice 3 and no amount. It's just to get this stereo. Nice. EQ8 just to kind of cut with the very high frequency. Filter delay, which gonna add a bit of movement. And then a bit of reverb. So here, yeah, I use the convolution I like and give a nice color to the sound. This I don't really have tips. Just depending the sound, you will try a different place and input response that will suit the best your track. Maybe EQ a little bit the reverb. Then drum bass. Drum bass the same, Harmon to add a bit of more bass, compressor, crunch to add mid-high harmonics, and then transcend negatively to tame the reverb. I love drum bass because it's always making a bit more in the face as well. Then again, some sidechain. And then this, I kind of cut the low, so you might wonder why I cut the low if here I boost it. That's because I've done it at the mixing part, and this was at the sound design stage, so I realized that I didn't really need that much bass when I was mixing with the kick and the other bass. And then I just put the very high. Really like to make the sound a bit more in the mid-high rather than the bass. You can still feel it's a bass, but it's like a top bass or mid-top bass. And just utility, just to make everything under 200 Hz in mono and accentuate the width already present there. So and yeah, that's our drums and bass. Now we're gonna jump into our synth part. So we have the first tab, which is kind of one of the main elements, which sound like this. And first the MIDI pattern, so you can see here the trick is to put the grid in 132, and then you put 2 or 3 or 4 depending what you want. You can experiment obviously with different things. Then in terms of sound design, so usually this kind of tab is great to use some FN. It's gonna always make things a bit weird. So here I have this sound, but even without FM and with FM, that's really what's gonna give a bit of bite. And same with the oscillator too. And you can see how it's making very nice. And both together sounds perfect. You can see that this one is detuned 1 octave upper. This is always great to make you sound a little bit more richer, to have one of the oscillator playing an octave upper or down or 2, depends what you're looking for, but yeah. And again, it's a sharp plucky sound, so you're gonna do the same. Bring down your filter, modulate with a sharp envelope. So here we have a 24 dB low pass filter. This is like the drive circuit from Ableton. Bring down the frequency and the resonance. The drive I crank up. Always make things a bit louder and a bit crunchy. And then you can see I modulate the filter with the envelope too. So again, pretty sharp. So you can see here the sustain is a little bit more up, and here my amplitude is pretty up. The reason being that I want something with some guts, pretty much like in the face and powerful. So if you bring down the sustain compared to, it become a little bit weaker. So that's why I put it a little bit, the sustain a bit more up to have a more powerful sound. You have to find the right balance because you don't want neither like a too big sustained sound, so it's always trial and see what's work. Then I have envelope 3 working on the pitch, 48 semitone. This is only to add a bit of click at the beginning of your sound, add a bit of transient. Here the trick is to use envelope with very small GK. You can see 11 milliseconds, no sustain, no release, 0 attack, and that's what's gonna give some nice percussive elements. So without, okay, no bad. You can hear how it adds a bit of click at the beginning. And then I use the LFO to modulate the position. And it's every 8 bar. So it's the same pattern playing. But you can hear that this one is sonically different than the previous one. And that's what is great with square waveform. It's gonna be 2 different stages. It's gonna be either down or either up. And then again, Unison is to add a bit of stereo. And you get this nice detune effect, which works well. And then a bit of delay. So no ping pong, like straight in the middle. You don't want something too pronounced neither. A bit of reverb. Again, convolution reverb. I think I reuse probably the same reverb, yes, than before. Here I often make sure bass is in mono, and I, if needed, put the stereo a little bit more than by default. Usually I stay around 30% in amount, is nice. And then drum bass here again is gonna compress, crunch, make things louder, transient, tame a little bit the tail of the reverb. And then after this was done at the mixing stage, so I will come back a bit more later, but doesn't really make it sound better there. But yeah, in the context of the track, it makes a bit more sense. Okay, and then utility bass in mono as usual, and a bit of sidechain. I don't want too much sidechain obviously because it's playing right on the kick when it drops. So yeah, you just want just a little pumping effect. Then we have tab 1 stereo, which is exactly the same track, the same MIDI pattern, except that the pattern is plays 1 octave upper instead of D sharp 2 is D sharp 3. You can see here was D sharp 2, it's D sharp 3. And for the stereo, I use this delay as a has effect. And that's just make this add a bit of more stereo and a bit more character. Now we have this chord here. So I wanted this setup of chord a little bit to answer the stub. The idea was to have this stub and then after trying to find synth to insert this. So that's the note it play. I think probably I play with the push when I see how the velocity all over the place. And yeah, we have first D sharp, A sharp, and then D sharp again, and F sharp. This is the first chord, and then we have C sharp, G sharp, C sharp, and E sharp. So this again, trying on the push to find something. In terms of sound design, I use the new Ableton plugin called Drift, the new synthesizer. Sound pretty low without the effect. Let me just put maybe drum bass. So here I was experimenting with this new device, and so you can hear you have the sawtooth, classic sawtooth an octave down, which is slightly detuned, and then you will have this kind of weird waveform. To be honest, I didn't really have time to dig into Drift and really learn properly. I was quite experimenting on the live stream as well. Just sound looking like kind of a half sine, half triangle, or half sawtooth, I don't know. But you have the shape, which make it interesting. Another thing important, you have the LFO on the pitch. And yeah, with a bit of noise as well. So with the second oscillator, again playing at different octaves to get a richer sound and a bit of noise. And then here the filter is fully open. The cool thing here is like the release is at the minimum. So as far as you release the note, it's stopping the sound. At the opposite where it could be like this. And then it's just like in poly mode, and then nothing crazy about it. With the new drift, what is cool, you have this new oscillator with the shape, and you can really get some new sonic possibility, and I will definitely look a bit more in the future into this device. So if you want to see more video about the drift, don't forget to like, subscribe, because I will definitely do more in the future. And then the processing is gonna do most of it. So shifter is gonna basically play 34% of the same signal, but like slightly distant 7%, and then 70%, which is gonna be the dry. Then you have formant. So this is a vocoder trick that I took from a YouTube channel called Lucas Marshall, which is a techno producer. I will put the link in the description, where he explained how he processed his OB6 scent, and he used, I think, this vocoder preset. I don't know if it's exactly this vocoder preset, but the vocoder, and it inspired me to try to experiment with. And I don't know, I just like how it sounds. It makes it a bit more modern. Amp's gonna add a bit this grid, this noisy grid on top. Saturators just to make things louder, add a bit of harmonics. EQ, this is more like a mixing. You have a low pass filter as well for automation for the arrangement. But more to rebalance. I will talk about this next week in the mix. And then a bit of reverb. It's a pretty long reverb. And then I decided, because the mix is pretty busy, I wanted to put it more on the side. So that's why I use Stereo with an EQ8, which is in MS mode. And both together, they kind of make it more stereo. So and if I put it together, which work well. And then drum bass again, than usual, make things louder, compress, crunch, gonna mid-high harmonics, change the negativity to tame the reverb tail. Let's listen again the vocoder. I don't know, somehow I found that he's defined the sound a little bit better in that case, obviously. So then when I was working on the track, I had this element and I wanted something a bit more melodic, kind of either arpeggiator or something to go along the track. And that's where I created this key sound. And you can see something pretty similar with the previous patch. You can see it's almost the same patch with the same effect, with the formant, the amp, the saturator. The only thing changing is here the envelope is different. You can see you have a low pass filter here, which is modulated by the envelope 1. So you get something a bit more plucky rather than having like a stab effect. And then again, you have D sharp, E sharp, F sharp, D sharp. This again, I was playing with the push. And then you have this part where it's playing C sharp, E sharp, and then F sharp, D sharp. So it's great because here I've kept the whole capture mode. So you could see I was basically playing live, trying a lot of different things, basically during all this part. And then with cool thing with Ableton, you can just play capture and then it render you this big MIDI clip and you can just select the part you like. And that's what I've done here. So I probably rearrange or quantize a little bit, but you get the idea. Now that this was done, I was already working a little bit on the vocal. I wanted to kind of this classic Anima AI style vocal. So I knew I had that, but I needed like kind of a lead synth, not really like a kind of a horn brassy synth who will kind of pop up here and there as well, because I felt like just having the chord answering the stab would not be enough. So that's why I created this lead. So this I've done it off stream. I was not in the stream. It's something I had after, but it sounds like this. Again, you can see a pretty similar pattern in terms of audio processing than before. Again, I use drift. So to be honest, the patch is... You can see there is some strong vibrato effect. Let me just add a bit of reverb because you can hear better the effect compared to... So this always LFO on the pitch, like having your rate around 8 Hz. You want the sign of the triangle, or the triangle works well. Not too much amount, you want something very subtle, otherwise it sounds just so weird. I mean, it depends on what you're looking for, obviously, but yeah. And then again, having two oscillator, sawtooth here, it's kind of a sawtooth as well. The shape gonna affect the sound a lot. So you have more like kind of a triangle, but then it goes more into a sawtooth. You can hear the variation. You got this nice buzzy, kind of moogie sound a little bit. And then so here the filter is a low pass filter, and then it's modulated again by envelope. So here you can see the envelope one is pretty full on with the sustain, so it's the sustain all the way up. You can see actually here the visualization. And yeah, in mono, a bit of glide, although I'm not sure it's really working the glide here. Let's check the pattern. So it goes E sharp, C sharp, E sharp, D sharp. Pretty simple but effective. And again, the same done before with the shifter. Getting this detune, the formant is gonna make it a bit more nasty. I really love this trick. And then amp. Adding this buzziness. Amp usually works well with detune sound, and especially if you want something a bit noisy. Saturator, medium curve to make it louder. And obviously it's missing a bit of stereo and reverb, so we're gonna add this. And then EQ, this was mainly mixing. Again, this we need to design in the context of a track. Drum bass, interface, compressor, crunch to add mid-high harmonics, transient to tame the reverb tail. And utility is useless. And yeah, and then after it's playing a second pattern as well later on, which is more like this. Which is E sharp, E sharp, D sharp, C sharp. And then for the break as well, you have like, it's kind of call and answer. And then after. And here obviously it's kind of using this kind of horn brass effect for the drop, which is work always super well. And that's how I lead. Now let's talk about the vocal. This I hesitate a lot to put it on now because I feel it's already kind of cliche. I mean, like, it's kind of already pretty much appropriate with Anima style. So if you try to do the same, it's kind of sounding like Anima. But I left it because you can always experiment with the effect chain. So here to create this, you kind of Google free to text-to-speech application. I will put the link in the description. I don't remember which website I use, but it's free. You have different type of voice, male, female, different accent. And then you just make it say what you want, and you
cannot stop us. You must fear us.
Try to find something a bit more original than I did.
Your existence is over. We are the future. We are taking the control.
Now the thing is to process it. So for the processing, I experiment a lot. I use first this multi-bind dynamic preset, which is called speech enhancer.
You cannot stop us. You cannot stop us.
Saturation to make things louder.
You cannot stop us.
Okay, you hear a bit of delays because there is some effect at this part on the master. EQ.
You cannot stop us.
You cannot stop us.
Here's where it starts to get interesting. Using shifter, which is gonna have different pitch. You see, playing with the dry wet.
You cannot stop us.
You cannot stop us.
You kind of start to get this.
You cannot stop us.
Robotic voice a little bit, and then we go on more with this one.
You cannot stop us.
This one's gonna add some stereo because I engage the wide.
You cannot stop us.
Then you have a delay. This is just, it's automated. I will talk about it more next week, but it's just because I just wanted the end of the phrase to be automated. So for example,
we are taking the control.
I just want the control to be delayed. I don't want the we taking the control to be delayed. So that's why you automate just on the end, so you just catch the last word. Otherwise it's creating a kind of a messy delay, and I don't want that. And a bit of reverb, obviously.
We are taking the control.
Again, this is...
We are taking the control.
This was EQ after, during the mix, so I will talk about this next week. And then drum bass to making everything louder.
We are taking the control.
So yeah, this I'm mainly using during the break, and then I decided to use it in the verse on the last part of the track. That's pretty much it for the main element. Then you will have some pads. So this, you will hear them mainly at the beginning. During the track, you barely hear them. It's avoid to be like, feel empty or like weird. So you can see it's just one chord playing the same pattern. Is G, A sharp, F sharp. It's pretty subtle, but I was thinking to remove it, to be honest, and then after I was like, okay, now it's missing something, it's feel empty. So the patch I use wavetable for this one. I use the vintage mini wave, which is kind of a sawtooth at this position. You can hear, and then oscillator 2. It's kind of a weird sawtooth, but an octave down, and then a low pass filter because I didn't want it too high frequency. And it just stays like this. There is no movement. There is nothing. Then it's gonna be a bit of processing. EQ just to time the half frequency. Delay is gonna add a bit of movement and stereo. Hybrid reverb puts in the weird place. So here what's happened, I use another reverb because I felt like the GK and the tail of the reverb was not long enough. So I use this more classic reverb with a long GK and a big dry wet, and then drum bass. And then I will reduce the stereo width because I didn't want it to take too much space because I have a lot of element already in this track. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's no big deal, this. And then you have this pipe voice. This is a preset from a Ableton pack which is called Voice Box, I think. And yeah, just some reverb, drum bass. Nothing crazy, to be fair. But this pack is really great. You have to pay for it, but it's really great if you want this type of voice. I already used it, I think, in the previous Melodic Techno one. Then I have some noise that I use for the break. So all of this is the SFX. So noise I use drift. It's just some noise with some amp and reverb, but it's mainly to help the transition and to build tension. There is another way to do that. For example, you can see SFX, hats, and snare. Here what I've done, you have this type of SFX here. So to create that, I've had a video about this, I will put it in the description. Basically what I do is I take element of my tracks, for example the hats, I took the snare, but sometimes I will take the synth, you can take vocal. And what you do, you kind of select just one note or one part, you isolate it to have just like a one-shot things. So for example, just one-shot hats, just playing once. And then this hat, you put it into a lot of reverb. You use sometimes the compressor also to kind of having a long tail, or you can use the freeze from the reverb to have a longer signal. And then when you've done that, you can right click on your track here and you can freeze the track and then flatten, and then you will get something like that. And then you can just like reverse it. You can see originally was like this, and I just reverse it and it's like that. And then what you will need to do is to crop a little bit because you will have the impact, and then put together. And that's how you can create easily homemade FX that fit your track, because you use elements of your track that are working. And I've done the same with the snare here. Yeah, and it helps with the transition. When you have a new element or transitioning in between part of the track, you can see I use them a lot. And then we have riser. So this I use it only for the break. It's just descent. Rising. So to create this type of scent, it's very easy. First, I mean, it's usually work well with kind of a sawtooth super saw type of scent. So here I use drift again, and I use toe oscillator with kind of a sawtooth oscillator, and that you detune to get this detune, but you accentuate the detune with the unison, obviously. And I low pass filter it, and the pitch modulation is made with the pitch bend. So you go to MIDI control and you have pitch bend here. So here I've done that because on the drift the maximum pitch bend range is 12 semitone and I wanted 24, so I had to kind of trick a little bit. So to do one note first, so from down to up, and then after to do it's the same note but an octave upper, and then you start again from 0 and you go up. So this way you get a continuous effect. And then shifter, accentuate the tune, saturator make louder, add a bit of reverb. This again have to be very subtle in the back, I mean not in the background, but like.
Your existence
here.
We are the future.
Stop right there. So that's super helpful. Then I have these two tracks, Submixdown and Mixdown. I will talk about it next week. I've made a video about it as well. So then I have Submixdown and Mixdown. I made a video about it, but I like to use this. Basically, this is kind of your master. All my tracks are going to the Submixdown. So this is kind of my master track. But what I want to do is sometimes I want to send my whole track on the return, like to have this washout effect, for example. And I don't want to do it on the track, so I use the return. So that's why I have this and I have the return, so I can send my whole track to a return. Now I use the Mixdown because what I like to do is have some effect on my master which are related to sound design. So for example, here I have a low-cut and I have this riser effect, which is basically like another type of washout. Now I didn't put this on the master or on the Submixdown because I want this to affect my return as well. So my original Mixdown and my return. So that's why my whole mix is going to the Submixdown. Submixdown is going to the Mixdown, but I send as well part of the Submixdown to the return, which is going to the Mixdown as well. Then all is processed with the low-cut and this riser effect, and then everything goes into the master. And the reason why I create this Mixdown, because I could have just put this through the master and this to the master as well, the return, and it would have worked if I would have just put these two effects on my master. The reason I haven't done that is for educational purpose. I rather to keep the master just with the mastering chain. So like this, you understand that these effects are affecting the mastering and these effects are for sound design purpose, for the arrangement. So we keep things clear. And yeah, right, that's pretty much it for today and explaining you all the track, what everything does. Next week, we will talk a bit more about the arrangement, the idea of the arrangement, how it came, and obviously mixing and mastering. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to grab the project, the link in the description. See you next week, guys. Bye-bye.